You can't lose a game. You can't lose a game. That's the comments from Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles. It looks like Heather Dinich had an interview up at Ohio State with a lot of folks up there, and I was coincidentally watching the Ohio State Georgia game from earlier this a few months ago, and Knowles and Ohio State were really under a lot of pressure after the loss to Michigan in consecutive seasons to beat Georgia, and not just beat Georgia, but probably win the national championship with a win over the Dogs, and it didn't happen. And what you're seeing more and more across college football, whether you're talking about in Athens or wherever else, is it's almost like nothing's good enough except winning it all. And I can't remember who I was talking to about this. It wasn't that long ago, but the amount of pressure that's on coaches and coaching, Ohio State has real pressure right now. Ryan Day told her, when you lose, there's damage control. I think the problem for Ohio State is a very simple one, and it's one that can be fixed in 9 months. You just have to win the national championship. It's not that you can't lose. The new future of the new future of college football permits losing. And these games against Michigan that are sort of all or nothing fights at the end of seasons, those aren't going away, but the way in which they are constructed, that's going away. They're not going to be the end of the season. And in a way, I think it's just so tough for Ohio State to take that loss to Georgia. And there's a lot of reasons why. Let me explain it real quick here. Make sure, hey, listen, Doordash is still helping us out, partnering with us. Make sure you're taking advantage of this. Dawg Post Summer is the code. The link is down below. Get 50% off your first Doordash offer up to a $20 value when you use that code, Dawg Post Summer. And it's a limited time offer and terms apply, but they've really been awesome. And it lets you get food that you don't even have to leave your house. Isn't that the best part of Doordash? I remember going into the Dome and watching the close of the TCU Michigan game. And you're like, all right, the start of the game is like, all right, Michigan's kind of screwing around a little too much. Because I think Michigan was the team to me that could have beaten Georgia. Obviously, Ohio State as well. But what was happening for Ohio State that day at the Dome was they were watching in their eyes something that they couldn't believe, which was they would have lost to Michigan, their bitter rival, not win the league, and they still had everything in front of them. Everything. They thought they didn't play well, whatever you want to say about their game with Michigan. But Michigan was not going to be there. And their chance to win the national championship was right in front of them. All they had to do was beat the Dogs in Atlanta. They were going to smoke TCU. That's what they were thinking. And for, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, the first half, and certainly going into the fourth quarter, it looked like Ohio State was on the way. But then Georgia happened. And as well as CJ Stroud played, and he really did play well, it's hard to take away how well Stetson played in that fourth quarter. I mean, he was unbelievable. This guy, it never stops. I don't know that he had a play like this, but it never ends. And when they, anyway, pick up Double Dogs today, and you'll get our 2023 preview included. That link is down below as well. Stetson against Ohio State, as good as CJ Stroud played, you could argue that Stetson outplayed him. You look at statistically what happened in that game. I mean, that game, when we got back to the hotel, we knew we had just seen one of the all-time great games Georgia's going to be in. And they've been in a few of those lately. I mean, two of them were back-to-back, the 17 Rose Bowl game and then the national championship game against Alabama. I mean, those were all-time great college football games. And it had to have been brutal for Ohio State to lose that game the way they did, but they just couldn't stop Georgia. I mean, we want to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. getting knocked out of the game. Yeah, that happened, but that's not why Ohio State lost, contrary to popular belief amongst folks like Mel Kiper Jr. I mean, they lost because they couldn't stop Georgia. And that's why you get back to this, discussion from Heather Dinich with the defensive coordinator at Ohio State. You just can't lose. For the record, C.J. Stroud and Stetson both were 23 of 34. Stroud with an extra touchdown, no interceptions. Stetson 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Stetson had 398 yards. C.J. Stroud 348. So, I mean, you could argue. I think those are pretty comparable numbers. I mean, you'd rather have the touchdown than the yards. But, I don't really know that necessarily matters. I think the part that, I do think, just looking at this thing a little bit closer, I do think that Stroud probably played better than Stetson because of the running. I mean, he was sacked 4 times, and he still netted 34 yards. Stetson was sacked twice and had, 18 yards rushing. Negative 18 yards rushing. Ohio State was not going to let Stetson beat them with his legs. He beat him with his arm. I mean, you look at that fourth quarter, it was just that game. I've written books. I've written books, plural. You could write a whole book about that Ohio State game. If you get double dogs, this is not a pitch. This is just letting you know. If you're a person that's gotten double dogs, the section on Ohio State has reporting that nobody else has gotten, and just the Ohio State chapter is worth reading. Is worth the price of the book. And that moment when that kick didn't go in, we talk about that a lot in the book. And nobody else has written about that. That was one of the moments of pure joy from Georgia fans. You see that, but there's not been a lot of moments like that. There's 2 things I remember more than anything. You could hear it immediately that he missed the kick. When you're shooting, I guess I saw it, but you hear it first, sort of. That sounds strange to say. And then the reaction from specifically Justin Schaefer, who is not on Georgia's team at the time. He was an Atlanta Falcon, and Darnell Washington, who was on crutches and ditched them to go celebrate. Those were, of course, Georgia still had to snap the ball because there was like a second or so to go. But it was all there for Ohio State. And I think I have been on record multiple times talking about this, how, it's my belief that Ohio State will win the national championship under Ryan Day. They've recruited too well. Georgia's not going to do it every year. Alabama's not going to do it every year. There's going to be years where people like LSU and Clemson win the national championship. It's just been that Ohio State's not been that team. I just named all the national champions of the college football playoff era. Georgia beat all of them in the last 2 years. Ohio State will win their national championship again. And I believe it will be under Ryan Day. But I will say this. The longer it goes, the harder it will be. The longer it goes, the harder it will be for Ryan Day. The pressure, particularly with the success that Michigan has had. I mean, I wonder the last time Michigan has won back-to-back Big Ten titles. And I bet it's been a long, long time. And that's a problem if you're at Ohio State. That is a real problem if you're Ohio State, because Michigan had never won the Big Ten championship or the Big Ten title game until these last 2 years, and of course winning it back to back in any major conference, that's a big deal. But Michigan hasn't won it outright, been back to back years since 2001 since 1991 and 92. Y'all remember how rough the 90s were on Ohio State? Because they were rough. They lost a lot of big games right when you didn't need to. But I think Ohio State will get their championship. But the pressure of not winning the big game has got to be a problem up there. I'm saying two things at once. We have to be able to be nuanced here. Ryan Day has lost a national championship game against Alabama in not very close fashion. He had a very tight loss to Clemson, probably a game they should have won in 19. They weren't beating LSU. And then, the terminal games against Michigan in 20, the terminal game against Michigan in 21, and then the terminal game against Georgia, back-to-back losses. It's tough, man. And I can speak from experience covering a team for extended periods of times that have not won a national championship. I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but Georgia had not won a national championship in 40 years until they won it in 2021. So there was a lot of pressure that was escaped the escape hatch at that moment. But this Georgia program is a good example for Ohio State and the pressure that you get under with a fan base like these two have, which is demanding, will travel, has huge expectations, and supports the program. They want to see championships. I think until he wins it, the question will be, is Ryan Day going to win it? And then once he does, that will all go away. It's possible Kirby's won his last national championship at Georgia too. I am skeptical of that. I thought he would win the national championship at Georgia for sure. I can't remember when I first felt that way. Probably going into 18. It was just too evident, and that they didn't win it in that, I guess it was 18, 19, 20, so 3-year stretch. It was they were not as good as they needed to be in 20 to win it, and they certainly were not as good as LSU in 19. So 18 was their opportunity, and they just lost in the last play to Alabama, and we don't know what would have happened against Clemson. But I think Ryan Day is in good position, but Kirby's lived through this, and it's not a lot of fun.